Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the 2026 Annual Lande Family Lecture. The Annual Lande Family Lecture Series was established in 2017 in honor of Dr. R. Gregory Lande, his wife Brenda, and their son Galen, in gratitude for their very generous support of our capital campaign to save the old pathology building, which we wrapped up in the summer of 2024. Now I'm going to introduce our speaker. I'm very glad to have Nelson here today. Nelson Price is an Indianapolis-based author, journalist, historian, and radio personality. His books include Indiana Legends, Famous Hoosiers from Johnny Appleseed to David Letterman, which features profiles and vignettes of 160 notable figures. Legendary Hoosiers, and with co-author Joan Hostetler, Indianapolis Then and Now, which is a really great picture book that shows what our city looked like historically and what those spaces look like today. Nelson is the host of Hoosier History Live, a weekly talk show on WICR FM 88.7 in Indianapolis. A fifth-generation Hoosier, Nelson is a former feature writer and columnist for the Indianapolis Star and has served on the boards of several civic organizations. He's also been named a Sagamore of the Wabash by 2 Indiana governors. It's very impressive. The show, which has been on the air since 2008, is believed to be the only radio program in the country about a state's history that's live with listener call-in. Nelson is an award-winning former feature writer and columnist, as I mentioned, and he draws from his books to provide commentary on history tours across Indiana. In addition, he has taught at IU Indianapolis, regularly speaks at schools across the state as part of PTA-sponsored presentations about Indiana history, writes for several magazines, and has again been named Sagamore of the Wabash by 2 Indiana governors.
Right. Thank you, Sarah. Well, good afternoon. Because we're here at this terrific history museum, I'd like to start by time traveling to Palm Sunday more than 35 years ago, April 1990. I was among the media horde standing on the front lawn of Jeannie White's home in Cicero, Indiana. That's because national news had broken that her son, Ryan White, had passed away at age 18. To tell the truth, it felt creepy being dispatched to the house by my editors at the Indianapolis newspapers. Who in the media likes that kind of assignment? But I wasn't the only creep on the premises. Aside from a huge throng of media, celebrities showed up, including pop music superstar Michael Jackson. There also were Hamilton Heights high school classmates and grief-stricken friends and neighbors of Ryan's. Dozens and dozens of them came. So did throngs of other friends of Ryan's, neighbors, and other Hoosiers, many of whom had never even met him, but had followed the national news story about the boy initially living in Kokomo, who, even though diagnosed with AIDS, crusaded to attend school where he was assigned, which was Western Middle School in nearby Rushville. Several of the teenagers and families who flocked to the home in Cicero on the day that he died had heard the news about Ryan's passing from the pulpits in their churches earlier that Sunday morning, Palm Sunday. They brought flowers, cards, balloons, notes, and other farewell to Ryan gifts. They placed all that on the lawn surrounding an unlikely but ideal makeshift memorial. It was a souped-up Mustang that Michael Jackson had given to Ryan, a red car that had become such a great source of thrills for him. I think there might be an image of the Mustang among the photos that are rotating on the screen behind me. These photos are among about 100 pictures featured in the biography of Ryan White that the Indiana Historical Society asked me to write. I brokered a meeting between Ryan's mom, Jeannie White Ginder, and the Historical Society so that she could let us use rare family photos many from her personal albums and never seen before by the public in my book. By the time of Ryan's death in 1990, drama had been unfolding for nearly 1/3 of his young life. He was barely past his 13th birthday when he was diagnosed with AIDS. This was during the Christmas holiday season of 1984. About a year after that, I was transitioning as a young journalist from my very first job at the bygone Indianapolis News to my dream job. I was the education reporter, and I was transitioning to my dream job at the newspaper of profiling Hoosier newsmakers from all walks of life, notables like David Letterman, Kurt Vonnegut, Jane Pauley, Indiana Pacer Reggie Miller, Reverend Theodore Hesburgh, and Hoosier astronauts. So I began hearing about this unlikely newsmaker, a short, scrawny teenage boy who lived in Kokomo and was crusading to attend school in nearby Roosevelt. The whispers had yet to fully explode into controversy and panic, but I sensed that something was brewing. The rumors became increasingly ugly, vile, and vicious. One example, people said Ryan White was seen spitting on grapes in grocery stores out of a desire to infect other people. People started dumping trash on the lawn of the White family's house every day, day after day after day. So in the mid-1980s, a photographer and I drove to Kokomo to interview Jeannie and Ryan at their home on Webster Street. That was the beginning of my involvement as a media guy with Ryan's Odyssey. I feel compelled to share with you some observations from that initial interview. I showed up at the house with two big questions for Jeannie White. She was a single parent who was raising Ryan and his kid sister, Andrea, while working full-time as a factory worker at the Delco Electronics plant in Kokomo. Jeannie was among the women assembly workers known as Delco Dollies. Her ex-husband, Wayne White, was mostly out of the picture. He never had a public presence, nor did he ever do any interview connected to Ryan. My first big question for Jeannie was, given all the hostility in the Kokomo area, why don't you just move? Her response haunted me for a long time. So who, Nelson, will buy the AIDS house? Who indeed in the mid-1980s. My second big question was actually an observation, something I wanted to observe. I've been told that Jeannie was a stage mother who was savoring the spotlight and masterminding Ryan's crusade to attend school. Within just a few minutes, I realized it was the reverse. As the headline on my very first story about Ryan, which is in the display case here, or on the display table, as that headline reads, Ryan White calling his own shots. Jeannie confided that she would give anything if he did not want to go to school because his desire was creating so much overwhelming stress for the family, including his sister Andrea. Here's an aspect of the sibling situation. Before Ryan's diagnosis became public, 12-year-old Andrea had been the family star. She was a state roller skating champion in her age group. Ryan had been dragged for years to her competitions for a sport he could never do himself, along with all contact sports, because of the risk of, quote, bleeding out, since he had been diagnosed at birth as a severe hemophiliac. More about that in a bit. Now, the sibling dynamics in the family had flipped dramatically from Andrea being the focus to Ryan being showcased on national news. Jeannie candidly admitted that she was struggling to handle the sibling situation. If Ryan had not been fighting to attend school, the White family would be spared the ordeal that unfolded. What Jeannie admitted was a continual nightmare. But Jeannie also said this, paraphrasing, if your child has a limited time to live and he wants to spend it going to school or in any specific way, you as a parent will fight like a tiger to support him. A related observation from me. Ryan, like many normal teenagers, was not always an angel. On that first visit, I noticed that he treated Jeannie almost like she was his secretary. He gave bossy sounding orders, not just to her, but to me and the photographer. Initially, he told us there can be two photos, one of me in my room and one of me with mom. We ended up taking a lot more photos than that, including this is now iconic. That's been reprinted in a lot of books about all this, but it was taken on my first visit there in his bedroom. So I interviewed him in that bedroom. As you can sort of see from that photo, it was full of G.I. Joes and Marvel comic books, very typical teenage boy stuff, right? But my writer's eye noticed an atypical distinctive motto that Ryan had framed and posted above his bed. It read, quote, "I know I'm somebody because God don't make no junk." That stuck with me. So why did he want to spend whatever remained of his life in school? Ryan just wanted to be a normal kid, outside playing with his friends, going to school with his classmates, and fitting in with his peers. You know the old saying, there are no greater conformists than teenagers? That applies here. And it's a major reason, in my opinion, that Ryan became the national poster boy for kids with AIDS. He testified before Congress, appeared on national TV talk shows, was befriended by rock stars and other celebrities, and spoke before national conventions of thousands of teachers at venues like the Superdome in New Orleans. Ryan invariably came across as just a normal kid. He could have been my nephew, your son, your kid brother, your grandson, your neighbor, your student. And except he had an atypical gift for public speaking and for distilling complex subjects into cutting right to the essence. At an event later in his life, when he was named a Sagamore of the Wabash, by then, by the way, he had endured episodes of people with pickets, shouting slurs, vandalizing his lockers, teachers declining to have him in their classrooms, families circulating petitions, and even pulling their children from Western Middle School to set up a private alternative school so Ryan wouldn't interact with them. Well, at the Sagamore of the Wabash event, Ryan looked out at the crowd of observers and referring to himself and other young people with AIDS, he said simply, quote, "Please don't hate us." Right from the start of Ryan's life, he had struggled with medical issues. Jeannie told me that after he was circumcised, he bled for 3 days. Doctors determined that he had a shockingly low percentage of clotting capability in his blood, and they diagnosed him as a severe hemophiliac. He could never play contact sports. He could never roller skate with his champion sister. He could never risk being in a car accident because he would bleed out quicker than blood could be pumped into him. When her son was diagnosed as a severe hemophiliac, Jeannie recalled to me, she thought, please God, no, not this. Of course, by far the worst was yet to come. It was contaminated vials of factor VIII, the blood clotting agent for his hemophilia, that was eventually identified as the source of the AIDS virus in Ryan. Quoting Jeannie again, sometimes if he had a bleed, he'd get a shot every day for maybe 30 days. So he was probably infected not once, but thousands of times. This was, of course, during an era when blood clotting agents and other such products were not being tested and screened. However, by the mid-1980s, when Ryan's 9-month court battle to attend school began, much was known about how AIDS was contracted and how it was not. Contrary to what people would claim later, that nobody had any idea how AIDS was spread, the Indiana State Health Commissioner, an Ivy League educated medical doctor, and his staff were crisscrossing the entire state to attempt to educate the public. No, you could not get it from mosquito bites. You could not get it from shaking hands. You could not get it from a gay waiter. You could not get it from casual contact. Still, some people, too many people, would not listen. They succumbed to panic and rumors and uninformed opinion. An epidemiologist summed it up this way at the time, quote, "There really are two epidemics. One is an epidemic of the disease, and the other is an epidemic of fear." In re-interviewing all the key figures in Ryan's ordeal years later, when I was doing my book, the state health commissioner and others said they re-examined what they told the public at the time, 1985, 86, and 87, and said they would not change a thing. They were speaking accurate science. They didn't even need to update anything. As a newsroom colleague of mine told me at the time, quote, "If these people are ignorant, it's because they have chosen ignorance." One medical source, whom I did not interview at the time, was Ryan's personal physician at Riley Hospital, Dr. Martin Kleiman. Because of doctor-patient confidentiality, Dr. Kleiman did not do interviews. Plus, Ryan was a juvenile. Years later, when I was writing my book, Dr. Kleiman did help me tremendously, granting me several one-on-one interviews. By the way, Jeannie credited Dr. Kleiman, who was a distinguished specialist in infectious diseases, with keeping Ryan alive. When Ryan was diagnosed with AIDS in December 1984, he was given 6 months to live. He ended up living 6 years. Not that he was ever robust. Ryan was always scrawny, frail, and short for his age. When I first met him as a 14-year-old, he was only 4 feet, 11 inches tall, and 76 pounds. I noticed in his bedroom that he admired towering athletes like basketball stars, or at the other extreme, short celebrities like actor Michael J. Fox. Later, when I would cross paths with Ryan and Jeannie, sometimes in unexpected ways, I'd be astonished and saddened by his appearance. During the sensational and transformative Pan Am Games that Indianapolis hosted in August 1987, which I feel the Pan Am Games were my hometown's coming out on the international stage as a host city, the newspaper assigned me to cover two marquee sports, swimming and diving. Diver Greg Louganis became the superstar of the games. When I was on the deck of the IU Natatorium, covering Greg's gold medal winning triumphs, I suddenly noticed Jeannie and Ryan standing almost right beside me. Greg Louganis called Ryan his, quote, hero, and gave him one of his gold medals. That sounds great, but to me, the unsettling aspect was how Ryan looked then. Pale, gaunt, weak, with droopy eyelids. Fortunately, he rebounded after the introduction of AZT. Throughout the next few years, I strived to focus on sharing underreported aspects of his story and eventually included them in my biography as well. For example, even as Ryan became the face in this country of kids with AIDS, he helped save his grandfather's life. While writing about the crusade to attend school, I interviewed his maternal grandfather, Jeannie's father, the now late Tom Hale. Mr. Hale had gone out with a relative to eat breakfast, then returned home and said to his wife, "Gloria, my chest hurts and I'm sweating something fierce. Sweat is pouring off of me." Ryan was at his grandparents' house then and said, "Grandpa, you're having a heart attack. You get to the hospital right now." His family always said that Ryan, because he was a severe hemophiliac at birth and spent so much of his short life in hospitals, that he was wise beyond his years in medical issues. His grandfather told me that he was convinced if Ryan had not said what he did, Mr. Hale would have simply shrugged off the symptoms, the pains, and the sweat, and his heart attack could have been fatal because he would not have gotten instantaneous medical care. His grandparents, by the way, for Ryan's 11th or 12th birthday, had given him, at his request, a subscription to Time magazine because Ryan wanted to read the medical stories. So he and his grandfather had been reading about AIDS even before Ryan was diagnosed when he turned 13 years old. In May of 1987, when Ryan was entering high school age, the Whites moved from Kokomo to the town of Cicero in Hamilton County. So, to circle back to one of my big initial questions, who did buy the AIDS house? Jeannie, Ryan, and Andrea were able to move for two reasons. An ABC TV movie was produced about his life called The Ryan White Story. The family was paid for the use of his name. Also, another celebrity supporter, Elton John. I have Elton John's biography. He devotes a chapter to Ryan in it. And Greg Louganis' the autobiographies of both of them. And Greg writes about Ryan throughout his. They're on the ancillary display there in the anatomical table. Well, Elton John offered Jeannie cash so that they could start over in a new community. He intended it as a gift, but in his autobiography, Elton John, not Jeannie, says she refused to accept it as a gift and absolutely insisted that it be a loan. Elton John wrote, quote, "Sure enough, years later, I received a check from Jeannie." So they moved to Cicero, and Ryan was enrolled in Hamilton Heights High School, where life was so much different. The family who lived two doors down from their house included the incoming student body president at Hamilton Heights High School, Jill Stewart. Now she's Dr. Jill Stewart Wabel. By the way, went on, this is an example of how Ryan impacted other people's lives. Jill went on to become a surgeon, and she told me she would often drive Ryan to his appointments with Dr. Kleiman at Riley. So Jill told me that all this medical interaction she witnessed and Ryan's medical challenges served as her inspiration to become a doctor. Well, Jill, as student body president, greeted Ryan right away and became his advocate. Dr. Woody Myers, our state health commissioner, partnered with Jill and other students because he realized the White family's move to a new community offered a fresh opportunity. Their strategy was the kids will be the educational leaders. We'll teach the students the facts, and then they will teach the parents. This will diffuse the situation from the start. So Hamilton Heights schools officials asked Ryan to wait for 2 weeks after classes resumed in the fall until he came to school. During those 2 weeks, the students were educated about AIDS with special classes, speakers, and assemblies. Jill's father launched a separate community initiative. He asked the Kiwanis chapter in Cicero to initiate a community education program about AIDS. Civic leaders and merchants attended breakfasts and other events that focused on appropriate responses to families with AIDS patients. I could describe other positive developments, but I want to shift to make a point. This is a point about Kokomo and Cicero. Some folks tended to depict the two communities with too broad a brush. There were Kokomo residents who supported Ryan and his family. They circulated petitions advocating for him to be in school. And there were people in Cicero who left hateful notes in the locker of his best friend, Heather McNew. She was the girl Ryan planned to take to the prom. Heather is now Heather McNew Stevenson. As she told me, I interviewed her for the book, that she lost babysitting jobs in Cicero just because of her friendship with Ryan. One mother told her, "I just can't take a chance with my children." The advantage that residents in Cicero had was they witnessed the national TV coverage of the hostile way that some residents of Kokomo treated Ryan. They knew they did not want Cicero to come across that way to the country. Ryan, by the way, told Heather the color of the dress that he wanted her to wear when they went to the prom. Green, he said, to match your eyes. He died before he could take her to the prom. After that, I remained in contact with the White family. For example, Jeannie let me break the news years later that she was remarrying. I have that story here. Headline: Ryan's mom remarries in this visual display. Coincidentally, she was marrying a Cicero neighbor, Roy Ginder, whom I had met and interviewed on that Palm Sunday of Ryan's death. Roy Ginder was a divorced dad who lived down the block near the Whites. He was a mechanic who had noticed Ryan tinkering around with the red Mustang that Michael Jackson had given him, but Ryan had no father figure to help him with the mechanical aspects of the car. So neighbor Roy would stop by to assist him. I guess you could say that even though Ryan was gone by the time Jeannie and Roy married, Ryan had paved the way for their introduction that led to the marriage. When my book was published, the Indiana Historical Society brought Jeannie and Roy back for the launch. Jeannie and Roy had moved to Florida in the 1990s, Leesburg, Florida, and that's where Jeannie lives today. Roy sadly passed away in 2020. They flew them back in for my book launch. The Historical Society flew in Olympic gold medalist Greg Louganis. I emceed the launch event, which involved me interviewing Jeannie and Greg in front of the audience. I want to share how I wrapped some of the people here were there that night. I want to share how I wrapped up things that night. I interviewed myself in addition to interviewing them. And I asked myself a big question. What's the takeaway from Ryan's story? What's it all about? Well, it's certainly about tolerance. It's about second chances and resilience, courage. It's about reason in the face of panic. And it's about telling the truth, not distortions or gossip or ignorance masquerading as informed opinion. His story is also about community. Make that communities, plural, not just Kokomo and Cicero, but the human community. On the other hand, Ryan's story also is about the power of one. Thanks for your attention. And I think, as Sarah said, we have time for some questions. And then after that, you're all invited to look at these visuals that I have set up here, and more of them are on the Anatomical Museum in the other room there.